Hi, let me welcome you all to this episode on architecting solutions using Visual Studio 2010. Before we proceed any further, kindly allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tejasvi Kumar. I work as a developer technology specialist. I focus on Visual Studio and the related technologies. My email alias is there on the screen, tejkumar@microsoft.com. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or if you require more information on this technology. Today we're going to be talking about the architecture capabilities in the Visual Studio environment. So I'm specifically going to be focusing on this particular edition called Visual Studio Ultimate that you actually see on this stadium slide right at the top. So architecture capabilities are available in Ultimate edition of Visual Studio 2010. So in terms of the target audience, so this is really focused on the developers and the architects. From a developer's perspective, it's all about understanding the code. So today you have so much of complexity in your applications, right? And if you have to go and make a small change, you really need to get a graphical representation which speaks thousands of words. It's all about that. It's all about trying to understand your code. Second thing is, so that you can actually go and make the right fixes or the right kind of changes to that particular application. So that's from a developer's perspective. And then you have the architects. From an architect's perspective, it's all about trying to understand the domain. That's number one. Number two, it's about the solution of the application that you're trying to build. So it's basically targeted towards these two scenarios. So I'm going to give you some demonstrations. You'll probably be able to relate to what I'm talking about. From a product perspective, it focuses on three core areas. The first one is all about understanding the code. So as I told you, maintenance applications, right? There's close to 75% of the work that we do today, it's all maintenance work. So in these maintenance scenarios, we need to really get a graphical representation of that huge code base, which is unfortunately not being documented by the developers. So for you to actually go and look into the sources, it's an Herculean task. So what we've introduced here is some of these amazing capabilities which helps you to kind of get a complete graphical representation. It could be from a UML perspective. So we finally embraced UML. There's a lot of feedback that we received in the past saying that Microsoft has not really supported UML through the Visual Studio environment. We've finally done that, folks. So you have these UML capabilities available in Visual Studio itself. We've also introduced a bunch of capabilities through DGML. So it's basically domain specific language. So I'm going to again show some demonstrations. From a maintain perspective, there are layer diagrams. There's a bunch of, from a overall validation of the architecture perspective, you can actually bring in all of these validations at the build process. So as an architect, I can actually go and create my architectures and ensure that my developers actually follow whatever guidelines I've actually brought in my architecture. So all of that can be controlled through my build cycle. So that's again, a nice capability which can be very, very useful for development teams. So from an extensibility perspective, we have introduced a bunch of extensibility points. You can actually go and create your own notations, specifically around DSL. So given that UML, is a methodology that kind of, goes across different, verticals and stuff like that. If you have any specific domain, any language that you're targeting, you could actually go and build those models yourselves. So all of those extensibility points are available here. So I've just shared a few screenshots here. It'll probably give you a sense of the capabilities we've introduced in the Visual Studio 2010 product family. Here we have the activity diagram, which is UML. We have the use case diagrams. We have the sequence diagrams. We have the component diagrams. I don't want to really talk about UML here because UML is something that most people would understand. But specifically around the Model Explorer, I'm going to show some demonstrations on some of these capabilities. The architecture layer diagrams. So the architecture layer diagrams basically give you these insights in terms of how your architecture looks like, and that's number one. Number two, you can also make sure that people follow these guidelines that you've actually set. So this is the layer diagram that actually helps you with regards to that. You have an architecture explorer as well. One of the coolest things that we've introduced as part of the Visual Studio 2010 product family perspective is this dependency graphs that you can automatically generate. So these dependency graphs gives you, the complete relationships between each of your, the namespaces, or it could be right at the assembly level or at the class level of your solution. And that gives you a very nice representation of the different calls which are going from a particular assembly to another class and stuff like that, right? So all of that is like really useful for architects and developers. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to a quick demonstration. I'm going to just show you at a very high level some of the key things that we've actually introduced as part of the Visual Studio 2010 product family. I'm going to be using a virtual machine for my demonstrations. So let me firstly show you the reverse engineering capability. So I've just opened one of the C# files here. So you see a bunch of code here, right? So what I could do is I could just go right click here and then say generate a sequence diagram for me. And what it does is it goes and generates the sequence diagram for you. So you can actually go and specify the number of the depth of the calls and stuff like that. So I've taken the defaults here, which is 3, and this is just gonna give you the sequence diagram. So gone are the days where you had to rely on third-party tools to kind of work on your UML diagrams, right? So here you have this capability to kind of convert your code into a sequence diagram, get a representation. The other thing that we provide here is if you want to, for example, right, as an architect, go and make, add a new call here, a synchronous message, for example. I could just go and add that here, and then you have this work item capability, the work item, which is the communication, unit of communication amongst the team members. I could actually go right click here and say create a new work item for me. So I could go and create a new task work item. It opens up that task work item for you. You could actually go and have the person who's working on this particular task, assign it to that person. You can go give it a name and stuff like that. I can save it, I can send it across to that particular person. All very straightforward. Now what I want to show you next is, let me just close this. Let me go into this architecture menu option. When you go into the architecture menu option, you actually have this new diagram. Click on that. These are all the different types of UML diagrams that we support out of the box. So you have the class diagram, you have the sequence diagram, the use case diagram. Just to kind of show you how this works, let me just go and open up a new, create a new use case diagram. So typically the way Microsoft functions, the tools work, right? You have the toolbox, and I could just drag and drop, all of these notations onto my designer surface, as simple as that. So I could basically just go and drag an actor, and I could go back on the toolbox, drag and drop a use case. So you have the actor, you have the use case, and what are we doing? We are launching, not launch, launching Visual Studio 2010. That's a big event for us. And then you have one actor here, and let me give him a name. So this guy is Tejasvi Kumar. And then you have like, an association, a relationship between these two. I could just go and, it's just a very simplistic example, but nevertheless, like, it shows you how this technology works. So there's just a use case. You could actually go save, you can do Control A and like, put it in a Word document, send it across to the different team members. All of that can be very easily done here. Let me close this. So what I'm going to show you now is fairly different. So let me show you the dependency graph. So I've gone into the architecture menu option here. I've clicked on generate dependency graph. What I'm going to do is, you have a solution, right? I'm actually working on a solution called patient monitoring. So I have the solution. Now I'm going to basically at an assembly level, I'm going to understand or generate the dependencies of each of my assemblies in my solution. And that's what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to click on, go and generate the dependency graph by assembly name. So it's gonna just go and magically pop up this cool the representation of my solution. And this, according to me, folks, can make a big difference, because I saw a lot of benefits. So when I was a developer, right, I used to work on this maintenance code, and I used to really struggle. I used to really struggle to understand the dependencies. And at one point in time, I'd actually gone and basically read through each of the lines of code just to understand what each of those lines of code actually does. So here this really helps your helps you understand the dependencies. It actually tells you what each of these methods or classes are actually doing. You could then go and add the necessary code into those sections, and then everything is very smooth. So while it's opening up, I'm on a virtual machine, so it's going to be a little slow, just bear with me. So I'm actually working on this, I've taken this application which is called patient monitoring. It's available for download, so if somebody wants to try out whatever I'm showing you, right, you could actually go and download this application and try it out yourselves. So if you notice here, this is like a cool thing. Whatever I've done, I've just clicked on the dependency graphs, and magically it kind of gives me all the relationships. Yeah. So this is at an assembly level, right? I could actually drill into the details. So I could actually go a little deeper, click on that, double click. I get into the namespace. So I can then go a little deeper as well. I get into the class. Now if I want to understand, I have this class called charts manager. If I click on the charts manager, you see those blue lines? It actually tells me that charts manager is actually making a call to each of these different assemblies there. And if I want to drill into the details, I can actually go and over my mouse around that particular line and then expand. What happens magically, it tells me which particular method is getting called by that particular class. And this is amazing, folks. This is really, really going to help you out. And if I want to understand, or if I want to see the code, I can just double click on this. It goes and opens up the code for me. So you're going straight from your architectural view into the code itself. You could actually go and then, work on, whatever changes and stuff like that. Very, very cool. I urge you all to download Visual Studio today and try it out yourselves. The other thing I want to show you is we have a bunch of DGML diagrams here. So I want to walk you through one of those very interesting scenarios. So let me go and generate a new diagram. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and create this thing called a layer diagram. So let me give you a scenario. So you have these architects in your companies, right? So the architects are the ones who actually go and design your applications at a very high level. But one of the challenges they have today is whatever they do, they have to make sure that everybody, the developers especially, right, go and implement these applications within those boundaries of the architectural guidelines that I've actually defined. Now today there's no easy way to do that. So what I'm going to show you is an example of how you can actually go and do that. So as an architect, I've just gone and opened up a new layer diagram here. So I have the toolbox on the left hand side. I go to the toolbox, I have these layers. So layers are those dabbas, right? So you have these different dabbas, drag and drop these dabbas. It's a classic situation where you are an architect, and half the time you don't know what the architects do. Don't get me wrong. But the architects are the folks who actually go and build this high-level representation. So what I'm doing here is I have this layer 1. So imagine layer 1 as my graphic user interface. So I'm going to go and give it a name. I'm going to go and call this charts visuals. The second layer, imagine it's my business logic tier. So I'm going to go and give it a name. I'm going to call this charts rotator. The third layer, imagine this is my database tier, the backend database. So I'm going to go and call this charts data. So I have these 3 layers now. So the way it's supposed to work is my front end, which is charts visuals, it can only interact with charts rotator. So any call which goes from my ASPX page, right, has to be routed through the charts rotator, which is my business logic. So all of the calls should go there, and only then can it make a call into my database. So which means charts rotator in turn can make a call to my charts data. Very, very straightforward. I'm sure everybody can relate to what I'm talking about. What I can do now is I open my Solution Explorer, and in my Solution Explorer, I can actually drag and drop. So specific projects, right? I can bind my charts visuals, which is a project in my solution, to that particular layer. Similarly, I'm going to go into charts rotator. Now charts rotator, I can drag and drop. So I'm binding that charts rotator project into this particular layer. And finally, you have charts data. So I'm going to go here and drag and drop charts data into this layer. What I can do now is I can actually go right click here and say validate my architecture. You could also do this as part of your build process. That's like an amazing capability. So what I can do is, we have this team foundation server in the back end, right? So I can actually go and, as part of the team foundation server build process, go and ensure that this validation happens. So during the build run. So which means if the developers have not followed these guidelines, then the build will break and you'll know the culprit immediately. And then you will ensure that, everybody's following these guidelines for that particular project. So that's the capability that we provide here through this particular feature. So this is from I explicitly went and, validated my architecture. What you could also do is, for example, if you have this patient monitoring, right? If I drag and drop patient monitoring onto my designer surface, and you want to understand the dependencies between the patient monitoring layer with my other three layers, which is the visuals, the rotator, and the data, right? If I want to understand these dependencies, what I could do is I could just drag and drop it onto my designer surface here, and then right click and say generate dependency. So what's going to happen now is magically it's going to go compile my code. It's going to tell me whether patient monitoring has any dependency on the other three layers that I have on my designer surface. So this is just an example. So imagination is the limit. You can actually go to any level, understand the dependencies. You can actually go and pull out the different classes, different assemblies from different places, and then put everything onto the designer surface and say go and generate dependencies or validate my architecture and stuff like that. So that's the ability, folks. It's an amazing capability here. So if you notice here, you have the dependencies reflecting here. So you have the patient monitoring, you have the charts, visuals. So you have these arrows here. So those are automatically generated for you. So you could go and leverage these capabilities. The last thing I want to show you here before I move on is you have this architecture explorer. So again, it's a very useful capability. So you could actually you have the class view or the solutions view. Let me go to the solutions view. I'm going to pick up one of these projects here, say charts data. You have these 4 files here, right? The C# files, the classes. So I could actually just go and then generate the graph. I just chose those 4 the CS files and then said generate graphs for me. What you can also do is if you want to understand the references, for example, right? I could actually go and look at the references. So are there any references which are in this particular solution? So I can actually go and choose references here. You have a bunch of different references happening here. You could actually drag and drop. So for example, the presentation framework, right? I could just drag and drop the presentation framework onto my designer surface. You actually get to see the dependencies straight away. Amazing capability. System.data. So system.data, if I just drag and drop, again, magically everything is represented there. System.dll, drag and drop. So it goes right down to the framework level, folks. It's an amazing capability. You can actually go create all kinds of scenarios. You'll get a complete view of your architecture, and that view can actually help you go and fix those problems or maintain your applications and go and induce that change that your business users probably require. So this is what I wanted to show you as part of my demonstration. We have references. You can actually go download Visual Studio 2010 today. We are going to be releasing Visual Studio 2010 on the 12th of April. And there's a lot of information available in the second URL. Urge you to go and have a look at it. If you want more information, feel free to write to me, tejkumar@microsoft.com. I would be more than happy to respond to you. With that, folks, thank you so much for joining us for this briefing on architecting your solutions using Visual Studio 2010. Have a great day. Goodbye.